All right, today on the Old Boy Podcast, you were in for a treat. This guy I have always been a fan favorite of. Followed him when he was at Sports Illustrated, Jeff Pearlman. So Jeff is recently, as he's working on this Tupac book, kind of put himself out there on social media, and he is one hell of a storyteller. Great author, ton of bestsellers, all about sports. You know, the Tupac book is his first kind of foray into like hip hop culture. He talks in depth about the research that he's done. It's amazing, and you can tell why he has so many New York bestsellers, because the time and the work that he puts into writing a book is absolutely amazing. I think this Tupac book's been like 2.5 years in the works, and just how deep he goes and the folks he talks to. Learn a lot about the creative process, and there's some amazing sports stories for all you sports fans out there. And I think too, like, Jeff just has a lot of great life lessons about how his career's been, those type of things, ups and downs. This one was really, really awesome. I enjoyed it. Once again, being a lifelong fan, getting to sit down and chat with him and learn more and talk more about his work and what he's done and where he's going. Absolutely amazing. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did. We'll catch you next time.
Man, you hear that? Look at here. They're coming. They're coming. We're going to have a party.
I'm talking good on barbecue.
Welcome to this edition of the Old Boy Podcast, and I am very excited today to have someone that I'm a huge fan of, Jeff Pearlman, join us. Jeff is a New York Times bestseller 9 times, worked for SI, and is currently working on his deadline for what's going to be, I feel, the Tupac documentary or biography. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Yes, sir. So one of the things in kind of researching our discussion, I went back and, watched some of your other interviews and just did a little bit of general research. Man, did you grow up playing and loving sports? Because, I mean, you've kind of been in the writing business since, what, around 17 years old?
Yeah. I mean, I did. I grew up, I was a kid who played, I grew up in a small town, Mahopac, New York, did all the sports, was mainly a runner. I used to run races every weekend. So it was a golden age of like road races. So as a kid in the 80s, 10Ks, half marathons, 5Ks, 7 miles, 10 miles. And I did all these runs, ran a year very poorly at the University of Delaware, realized my future, it's a common sports writer thing, realized I wasn't going to be running in the Olympics or even close to the Olympics, and just really got into writing. And I love writing more than I love doing. I just love writing. So it's a good match for me.
No, that's awesome. And then you finished up at Delaware and you got to go to Nashville back before Nashville is what it is now. What was it like, working in Nashville for the Tennessean? What was that, probably early, well, I guess kind of early 90s, late 80s?
That was 94. So
94.
I got hired in 94. It was, I was a fish out of water in a lot of ways. I really was. I was like this New York guy, and I was like, I'm never going to like country music, and I'm just going to, no, I'm here to work. And I love country music now, love country music. So that did that. It was a great town. I go back now. I'm not saying it's a bad town now, but I don't really recognize it. It has a lot more Las Vegas in it than it did back then. And back in the day, you actually, walking around Nashville, would see country artists from Nashville playing in little clubs just trying to make it. You actually saw people with their guitars and the case open, asking for money, playing on a sidewalk, and it had an authenticity that the town severely lacks now. I mean, it's a great place. It's still a cool town, but it's not as authentic as it was. And I was, I had a million jobs there. I was a food and fashion writer. I was a music writer. I was a sports writer. I was a cops writer. I screwed up over and over again. I was young and cocky and stupid and dumb and not very good, but it was a great, it's a great place to live. It really is.
Yeah, no, I loved, I got to visit it back kind of in the early to mid 2000s and still go back there. I'm probably there for work 2 or 3 times a year, easy now, but it has definitely changed, but it's a vibrant place. I did have to say, I kind of cracked up when I saw that your first assignment was food and fashion. Not to say you don't enjoy food, Jeff, but I wouldn't have put you on the fashion. No offense. Nothing.
It was the worst job ever. It was the only job I had open. I mean, it was cool.
Yeah.
I can't dress. I can't cook. I didn't know anything about anything. I made one mistake after another. I was way out of my depth. And the minute I finally eventually got the very highly coveted high school wrestling beat and started covering high school wrestling, that's when my career, when I kind of found my footing. because it was the one thing I was okay at in Nashville.
The highly confident high school wrestling assignment. I love it. That's hilarious. And then after that, you get the opportunity with SI. Is that what kind of comes up next career wise?
Yeah, I went to Sports Illustrated in '96. When I was a kid, that was my dream. That was always my dream. And when I was in junior high, I remind my mom this sometimes, but I told my mom, I was like, I'm going to write for Sports Illustrated. And she's like, you have to be realistic. You know, you have to be realistic. And I was like, I'm telling you, I'm going to write for Sports Illustrated. And I just knew it. It was like, it wasn't just a goal. It felt like this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I really want to do. So I just busted my ass and like worked really hard. And I wound up being a baseball writer there for a bunch of years.
Well, you know, and to go back for the listeners too, I mean, that's why you take a job in Nashville where you're not comfortable. You don't know shit. You take all these different assignments, just one, to get reps, one, to get your foot in the door, because you had said, I'm going to fucking get there regardless of what I got to do. And then boom, next thing you know, you step in and go. And what was that like? Like the first day you walk in SI, like it has to be this, man, I made it feeling, but there has to be this whole a little bit of trepidation too, right?
I think for me, it wouldn't be any different than your first day playing for the Yankees. Like I'd grown up idolizing the writers, idolizing the magazine. No one in my family cared about sports except for me. So we didn't even subscribe to SI. And I would run to the library. The library was a mile from my house. I would run to the library, sit there, read Sports Illustrated, read old Sports Illustrated, dig through old magazines. I knew all the names of the writers. I could tell you who was on the cover on certain dates. Like I was obsessed with Sports Illustrated the way a young shortstop might be with the New York Yankees. Yep. So when I finally got hired there and I walked in and you see the names and you're talking to these writers you idolized. I mean, I'm still at 52 years old in awe of those writers. You know, they're still my heroes and they're still gods to me. And if a writer might know my name, I'm always like, oh my God, he knows my name. Or if a writer might know something I wrote, oh my God, he knows who I am. Like I'm still that little kid when it comes to SI.
And that's amazing. I know for me, I grew up being a huge SI guy, and my power move always was to look at the cover and then go straight to the back. I wanted to see what Rick had to say. You know what I mean? Like I just enjoyed that. And then obviously I would go back to the front and just go through the magazine. But it was, you know, you think of just so many, you know, as a kid that grew up, you know, playing athletics, played a little bit in college and kind of cut it off there. But, you know, it was one of those things where you just looked forward to SI showing up. And like you said, we didn't have a subscription. So the school library had it. So I would check it out then and did that all the way through college. And then when I became a grown up, I actually got my own subscription, Jeff. It was a big deal. But no, I always loved the journalism. I always, you know, another thing I think too is like just some very iconic photos from, you know, we're within a couple of years of each other growing up. So, I mean, just some of the photos and some of the things you think about that kind of mark in our life what were huge sports events, you know, so many of them provided by SI, especially before you got into this age here where everything gets, you know, fed so quickly to you. Like a lot of times to get any in-depth besides just what you saw on Sports Center or what you read in the newspaper, you had to wait on SI to come out because that's when stories really meant something. Did you kind of appreciate and enjoy that you got to work during that era where you truly got to develop a story and you knew you had this time for it to come out instead of like, this is going to come out in 15 seconds. I got to try to beat somebody to the punch. That's got to be a way different environment and world now with social media than it was before.
Yeah, I miss it. I miss it a lot. It's the reason I write books. Like it was cool that you would, you know, it's not even exaggerating. Like when I was a baseball writer at Sports Illustrated, let's say they would say, go do a piece on Gary Sheffield. And Gary Sheffield was with the Dodgers. You'd fly out to LA. They would roll out the red carpet for you because it was Sports Illustrated and it was prime turf. You'd be like, I want to, I'd love to have dinner with Gary if that's possible. And most of the time they'd make it happen. And Gary, you'd have dinner with Gary Sheffield. You go out, you talk. Can I'd love to come to your house. Would that be cool? 90% of the time. Oh yeah, you should come by, blah, blah. Can I talk to your fiance? Of course you can talk to my fiance. I actually literally did a story on Gary Sheffield when he was with the Dodgers and he was engaged. And I watched the Dodger game with his fiance along the third baseline. And it was just me and Gary Sheffield's fiance watching the game. And like, those are the kind of things, that kind of access. Yeah. And like, again, like the thing that drives me crazy now is like, everything is hot take. Everything is Stephen A. Smith. Everything is Skip Bayless. Everything is and it's not even real and it's not even authentic. It's like, all right, the Knicks just made this trade. You need to have an opinion right now. Go have your opinion, put it on Twitter, put it on TikTok, have your opinion. And back in the day, and even you see the same in politics now, to be honest with you, like heaven forbid there's any nuance on anything anymore. Heaven forbid we have an actual conversation that goes beyond 2 seconds and we talk about something. We talk, you like Trump, you like Biden, you like the Knicks, you like the Nets, and we actually talk it out. We are an immediate gratification culture, not to get on this soapbox.
No.
And Sports Illustrated to me represented truly was like, okay, my magazine has come in the mail. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kick back on my couch. I'm not going to turn on the TV. I don't even have a cell phone. And I'm just going to read this article about Gary Sheffield. It's going to take me 25 minutes and I'll have a Coke and an apple and I'll read my magazine and it'll be a delightfully quiet, peaceful time in my life. And I feel like we are always on everything now. We don't really have that. It's kind of a bummer.
No, I completely agree. And you brought up something interesting too about, everybody having to have a hot take. And this is very biased because he's a good friend, but it's one of the things I love about Dan Patrick. Like when it comes to sports host, like I feel like Dan, like the number one thing to Dan, I feel like is always journalistic integrity. Like he doesn't care about beating someone to the punch, but when he gets to throw that punch, it's going to be very thoughtful. It's going to be very fact driven. It's going to be very detail oriented, and he'll still put his opinion on it, not afraid to, but he wants it to be more well-rounded than, oh, I got to beat this guy to the punch. And I feel like that's a lot of, Dan came from the old school era too. And I feel like you see a lot of that in his product. I
agree. I mean, Dan, to me, there's like a very increasingly small group of Dan Patricks. You got Dan Patrick, you got Rich Eisen, Jim Rome, Colin Cowherd are guys, say what you want about them. Like they will let you have a conversation. They will talk about something. They don't need to be right. They're not yelling at you. They're not yelling at the audience. But that's a very shrinking market right now. And what is in right now is the Skip Stephen A model of, I know I'm going to scream it at you. And then I'm going to move on to the next subject. And then I'm going to move on to the next subject. And it just, I always think like, how do you even care that much? You know what I mean? Like I saw Stephen A. Smith almost sobbing about the trade the Knicks made. And I'm kind of like, bro, you're older than me. Why do you care? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
You're a grown ass man. What are you doing? Like, who cares? It's not that important. I just don't get it. I honestly don't get it.
Yeah, to me, I kind of think of it as like when you see that, I'm like, I feel like there's filming this 60-minute or 40-minute after commercials, 40 whatever minute show, literally just so they can cut it up into 30 to 90-second bits for social. You know what I mean? Like almost a TV because of the way everything's so over dramatic and so blown out. It's like this is just a TV show that they want to cut into 12 sizzle clips for social to see if one of them will go viral.
I don't disagree. And I also think one thing that's been lost, I saw this, so I had a book become a TV show, Winning Time.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Yeah, keep on.
And what I learned from that experience is something that I also learned with Sports Illustrated and sort of the decline at Sports Illustrated is what you need from networks, what you need from publications, what you need from websites is, and this is going to sound weird, money can't be the only priority. Like making money can't be the only priority. Winning Time is a really good example. Winning Time was a great show. Winning Time's second season came out during the writers and actors strike. The promoting wasn't there because no one could promote it. Didn't get the numbers, and HBO just, we're going to kill it. And that's it. We just killed it. We're going to kill it. And back in the day, it had good ratings. It didn't have breathtaking ratings, but it had good ratings. And back in the day, I was told this by everyone who worked in Hollywood who I knew. They would have given that a third season, given it time and see if it develops and give it another season because it's worthwhile. Sports Illustrated back in the day, maybe sending a writer to Antarctica to play golf isn't the best way to spend your money technically, but it's going to result in a great Steve Russian story that's going to make people say, wow, this is a great magazine. It's worth investing my time and my money in this magazine. Nobody does that anymore. It's all quick. It's all quick hits. It's all how do we make the quick buck? And I know I sound like an old angry man, which I kind of am because I feel like quality has gone out the window and that frustrates me.
No, I completely agree. And honestly, Winning Times, I'm glad you brought that up because not doing that for a season, because after season one, man, even when season two came out and through season two, it had great talk around it. I mean, season 1 was phenomenal. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
And not to give that a season 3, just once again, it just shows such short-sightedness and nobody wanting to stick with it, which is so terrible. I do have a question. What does that process look like? So, you know, obviously you had written the book Showtime. It's out there, like, and I know all the time people reach out to option this, option that, but you have to get a lot of those for one of them to actually come to real fruition, see it on HBO, play out 2 seasons. One, super rewarding, but like, how does that whole process even start happening? I got to think it's got to be pretty long.
Yeah. So I've written 10 books, and I think all of them except Clemens and Bonds, and maybe Walter Payton, have been optioned at one time or another. And what you learn early on, like, first time a book is optioned, you're like, oh my God, they're going to make this into a movie. Oh my God, my book is, and that never happens. Then the second time you get less excited. And by the 12th time or whatever, you just hope they're giving you some money. If someone's giving you $5,000 to do nothing, all right, I'll take that. That's cool. That's honestly it. So when this book, a screenwriter named Jim Hecht, a really good guy, came to my house years ago when I was still living in New York, it's like a decade ago. And he's basically like, his big credit was Over the Head, Ice Age 2. That was Ice Age 2 was his big writing credit. So the guy from Ice Age 2 comes to my house and he's like, I want to option this. I really think it's great, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. It's never going to happen, but fine. And through the years, it took a long time. I was just like, well, this is never going to happen. Wasn't like I was thinking about it because I just knew it wouldn't happen. So it wasn't in my head. And then one day, there's an article in like Variety, and it's like John C. Reilly signs on to play Jerry Buss in HBO series based on Laker book. And I'm like, that's me. That's my book. And then it's like Sally Field signs on, Jason Segel signs on, Jason Clarke signs on, Adrian Brody signs on. And I'm like, holy crap. So for it to then happen, and they really kept me involved in ways they didn't have to keep an author involved. They really did. They would have me out. They would ask a ton of questions about, is this right? Did we get this right? What do you think of this? My wife, my kids, and I, we all appeared in the series. It was awesome. And it paid well. It wasn't like, it didn't make me rich, but it certainly helped me through college. And like, it was just an awesome, awesome lifetime experience. And the big moment for me truly was, so they had a premiere party for the first season. And my wife was not home. Sadly, she was on vacation with her mother, long planned vacation. So it was me and my 2 kids. They sent a car for us. And my kids were like, oh my God, they're sending a car. They sent a car. It's at an old, classy movie theater in LA. And they have a red carpet. It's like, oh my God, they have a red carpet. Dad, you got to walk the red carpet. I'm not walking the red carpet. Dad, walk the red carpet. Mr. Perlman, you should walk the red carpet. All right, I walk the red carpet. We're surrounded by stars. My daughter, Casey, loves the Muppets, and Jason Segel is in one of the Muppets. It's like, do you think he'll take a picture with me? I'm like, well, let's go ask him. So we're having this moment, and there was this moment of moments, and it was just one of the great moments of my life, truly, because I was with my kids. Is Adam McKay is on the stage before they're showing the first episode, and he's calling out different people, and my daughter said, do you think he's going to say you? And I was like, no, definitely not. And he goes, Jeff Pearlman, one of the great all-time sports writers, blah, 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 stand up. And like, I'm with my kids and this moment is happening. And there's this TV show taking place based on my book. It was ridiculous. And then later that night, they had this great party and they had a cigar bar where they were rolling cigars. And my daughter, who was in high school, she's like, we should totally smoke a cigar. And it was me, my daughter who was in high school, and my son who was in high school, both at the time. And I was like, we should smoke a cigar. So, because this is your moment. And like, it might have been the worst parenting moment ever, but it was the best parenting moment ever.
You get a pass on that night, Jeff. It's all right.
It was me, my daughter, Casey, my son, Emmett, smoking cigars at a TV show premiere with all these stars in Hollywood based on a book I wrote. And it was one of the great, if not the greatest, truly moment of my life. It was just awesome.
That's amazing. Proud sponsor of the show, Trollco Clothing. Love what the brand's about. It's all about supporting that blue-collar worker. You know them for their trademark shirt and hat, dirty hands, clean money. It's not just a slogan. It is a lifestyle. Go visit trollcoclothing.com and use my discount code, OldBoyPodcast, for 15% off.
People wouldn't think about it because who cares? But like, writing a book is a very isolating experience. Every book is a very isolating experience. You are in your own head. I suffered through all kinds of like anxieties and, you get depressed and it's hard and you're surrounded by just mounds of paper and you don't get to come out of your cave that often, like you don't. And I'm actually a social person. So it's an unnatural career choice for me in a lot of ways. So when you have those moments, right, when someone wants to talk to you or celebrate what you've done or something, it really means a lot because this job is 80% isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a great transition to something I want to talk about. One, before we leave Winning Times, I do have to say, and it sounds like you agree with me, the casting on that show was absolutely amazing.
Oh,
I did not know that, I've always liked John C. Reilly, but more for just like the slapstick, stuff that he does. I didn't know that he had that gear to play that. Man, he sure did. And what an amazing, just down the line, they just did. And even some of the younger actors, the young man that plays Magic and the young man that plays Kareem, these aren't guys that have been in their whole life and they just crushed. You know what I mean? They were so good.
Well, I thought, I agree with you about everything you just said, but I actually think the three most impressive castings are Magic, Kareem, and Larry Bird, because
yes,
they're all so familiar to us. So how do you cast Magic Johnson? How do you cast Kareem? How do you cast Larry Bird? And it was Quincy Isaiah, it was Solomon Hughes, and it was Sean Patrick Small, and they just nailed it. It was remarkable. And
the other one I like too is Chickless is Red. That makes me think of like Chickless from The Shield, but like in a sports owner, mentality. I thought he played, but yeah, that was a true joy to watch. You were talking about that writing process and isolation, and I know you've got the Tupac manuscript coming up due soon, but just in looking at some of the stuff you've talked about with preparing that, and you talk about these mountains of, but over close to 100 books about Tupac, biographies, whatever, over 1,000 printed articles, and then about 650 printed interviews to go through and process and figure out what little keys here, what little keys there. Dude, that is a mountain of information.
I'm literally sitting next to Tupac's. This is just the 1990 tour he did with the rap group Digital Underground. Those are all the articles. The thing is, this is something I definitely learned at Sports Illustrated, details. And he wasn't just drinking. He was drinking a Coke mixed with rum, but it wasn't just a Coke mixed with rum. It was whatever brand of rum. And it was, it wasn't a Coke. It was a Coke Zero. And it was lukewarm because it had been sitting out for a long time. And it was kind of flat because blah, blah, blah. It's all about the details. Everything is about
but that's storytelling and character development and scene development. That's what's different.
Well, that's what you try to go for. And I would say my best moment, detail-wise, was I wrote a book about Walter Payton years ago called Sweetness.
Loved it.
Thank you. And one of the best reporting moments of my life, truly, is he, after he was done playing football, he served as a assistant basketball coach at Hoffman Estates High School. And he gave the team had a playoff game coming up. He gave them a pep talk about trust. You need to trust each other. That's how you win. Trust. And he takes off his Super Bowl ring and he gives it to one of the players named Nick. He's like, Nick, I'm going to give you this ring. And I trust that you will bring it back to me Monday because I trust you. So for the weekend, keep my Super Bowl ring. And Nick is like, holy cow, wow. Well, that night, Nick has a party at his house, in the basement of his house for the team. And they're all passing around the Super Bowl ring. And at the end of the night, Nick says, all right, who has Walter's ring? And nobody has it. He's like, who has his ring? Nobody has it. He's freaking out. He has to tell Walter Payton on Monday they lost the Super Bowl ring. Now I'm fascinated by the story. And it turns out what happened is that night, there was a couch in the basement. There was a little tear in the fabric in the couch. The Super Bowl ring somehow slipped in a cushion into the fabric under the couch. They could never find the ring. The family, years later, gives that couch to a family friend whose kid is going to Purdue. This kid goes to Purdue. He's in a fraternity at Purdue. He has his couch in the fraternity house at Purdue. One day his dog is digging at the bottom of the couch, digging at the couch. What are you doing? He looks, there's a bulge. He rips out the bulge. It's Walter Payton's Super Bowl ring. The dog's name was Bailey. So the dog who dug the ring out was named Bailey. And that to me is my greatest moment of reporting ever. Finding the dog who found Walter Payton's super ring. And I love stuff like that. Like I love.
But like that is a story no one else would have got. And it just kind of, it lets you know what kind of man he was, that he was going to use this Super Bowl ring, you know, to build upon his team something. And then for it to end that way, like, and you know, one of the funniest things, Jeff, is right here in my notes. Cause you told that story the other day on TikTok, and I have ring story. So you beat me to the punch, but no, I thought that was amazing. And, you know, and Walter, you know, just going through and reading that book, it did such a good job of, you know, cause we just saw that greatness on the field. Right. And then you really got to understand more like the greatness of the person too, and the teammate, which I thought was just super cool.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that was, I don't know if it was my best book. It was one of the most rewarding books. And, the thing that was really fascinating to me is, he really had a tortured life after football. Like he was not, people just think you're Walter Payton. This is great. You played, you have money. Now you can go off and kick back and go on vacations, but like you have a life to live still. And his marriage fell apart. He was really depressed. He wanted to be an owner of an expansion NFL team. That fell through. He, you know, gained weight and ate like crap. And, you know, and it was really sad. And you know, at the end of his life, he was writing suicide letters to people who worked for him. He accidentally shot an employee with a gun. And then he had bile duct cancer and died. And to me, what I found a lot of people are like, in the immediate aftermath of the book, well, why do you have to write this about Walter Payton? He's my hero. I don't want to. And it's like, to me, knowing the full story of a person, like these are historic figures, and to pretend they just walked on water and had angel wings is a disservice to who they really were. Like these were real people. These were real lives. It is important to know what our figures went through and what they overcame.
Well, and that had to be one of the hardest things about your 2000s Lakers book, right? Is, you know, it comes out and then people want to talk about things, and, you know, Kobe passes and, you know, people don't want to talk about all that stuff. And I know you didn't get to interview him for that book, but there's still plenty in there about him, you know, from teammates, etc. But once again, like that's the story. You've got to take the circumstance out of it, right? I mean, it's just, here's the story and here's the person they were.
Yeah, that was a uniquely weird situation and tragic, obviously, because
absolutely.
You spend all this time reporting this book, right? And the truth of the matter is, for that time period, just talk about that time period, Kobe, not the most beloved guy in those Laker teams. Like, he was juvenile and standoffish and kind of a pain in the ass and blah, 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 about the Eagle, Colorado rape situation, everything about it. So you have this book, it's ready to go. And I was sitting in a coffee shop, and a friend of mine named Amy Bass texted me, and she said, "Did you hear about Kobe?" And I was like, "No." He's like, I think he died." And I was like, that can't be. And it really changes. Obviously, a book is the least important thing in that.
Absolutely.
The family, and it's a tragedy and families. But it does change. In that moment, the entire tone of the book and the reception of the book changes. Because suddenly, all these people who, like, a couple months earlier were telling, "Oh man, he was such a dick" kind of stories, and they were lighthearted because he's alive and he's there and he's doing well. All of a sudden, they have this weight to them, and it's like. So I rewrote the prologue to the book, the beginning of the book, and then I was like, I'm not going to change anything, because like the truth is the truth, and it's a true story, and it's a time period. It doesn't mean at 40 he was the same guy he was at 28. People change. Absolutely,
we all mature, you know. When it comes to one question I had is when it comes to the research, you know, by the way, I'm so glad you got on TikTok. I love the stories. Just, you know, you jump on, you tell a great story, you jump off. It's awesome. But you know, you talk about, well, I only had an address and I didn't have a phone number. Do you hunt all that down once you figure out the people you want to talk to, or do you work with like a PI or somebody to help lighten that load, or is that all you?
All right. So with Tupac, the book I'm working on now, I've been working with a genealogist who has helped me with certain people, because the book goes in a really sort of weird direction. It's different than past books I've written. 98% of the time, it's me finding people. And I actually like the door knocking thing. Is funny because it's terrifying, but I kind of like it. It's like I compare it to being in really bad turbulence, but you're flying to Hawaii. Like, there's something good coming, but you have to go through this. And that's
kind of hell getting there.
Yeah, it might be hell getting there. I mean, I guess you might. When I was working on that Shaq Kobe book, I wanted to talk to J.R. Ryder. And J.R. Ryder was he was on the Lakers briefly, famously erratic personality who could be very high, could be very low, could be thin.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I had an address, I didn't have a phone number, and it was in Arizona, and I was actually going to be in Arizona. So I drove to his house and knocked on the door, and I had with me a copy of my USFL book. And a little kid answers the door, and he's like, hello? And I'm like, hey, my name's Jeff. Is JR here? And he goes, hold on. He closes the door. A woman comes to the door. I'm like, hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I'm trying to find J.R. Ryder. I'm an author working on a book. She goes, hold on. Closes the door. I hear them like yelling at each other, where he's like, who's there? I don't know. Well, who is it? J.R. Ryder comes to the door. He's like, who are you? I'm like, hey, my name's Jeff Pearlman. I'm a writer. I'm doing a book about blah, blah, blah. He's like, nah. I'm like, he's like, nah, man. Nah. You can't just knock on someone's door. Bro, you can't just knock on someone's door. You have to kidding me? And he's going on, and I'm like, oh, he's big. J.R. Ryder's big. He's known to like not mess around.
A short fuse, yeah.
Yeah. So he opens the door, and he's like, man, what the hell? And he goes, what's that book you got with you? And I'm like, it's a book I wrote about the USFL. He goes, is that the Trump League? And I go, yeah. Man, you can't just show up at someone's house, man. Dude, you can't. And then he goes, all right, I'll talk to you. And he ended up giving me a great interview with a really nice guy. So,
but you don't know unless you get the balls to go knock on the door, brother.
It's not even, to be honest with you, it's not balls. I always say, like, I'm not an overly courageous person. I've knocked on a lot of doors. It's like walking through your fear. Like, that's all. It's actually walking through your fear. It's not like I'm courageous doing it. I just decide I have to do this, but I'm still terrified, but I have to do it. So I do it.
That's awesome. Well, and hey, if you feel like that's what you need for that piece to get it to the next level, then like you said, you got to get through that fear. I absolutely love it. Yeah. Speaking of the USFL book, I find that interesting. The USFL to me was just it was interesting, right? You had all these good players that wanted to start this new league, and it wasn't like the shit that's happened in the past where it's just a bunch of throwaways. I mean, there was some real ball players but God, it just seemed like they could never get their shit together between being a spring league and then being a fall league, and Trump trying to do the whole, pretty much use the USFL to end up becoming an NFL owner and all the other crap in between. But do you think if executed right, that could have been a viable option, Jeff?
No, but I think what would have happened. So basically, for people who may not know, like, it was a spring football league, started in 1983. A lot of famous football players who you would know started in the USFL. Jim Kelly, Steve Young, Reggie White, Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie, on and on and on. A ton of famous football players started in the USFL. I think ultimately what would have happened is you would have had a merger between the NFL and the USFL, because USFL was in some really good NFL market potential. They were in Baltimore after the Colts left. They were in Arizona before the Cardinals came. They were in Memphis before any team came to Tennessee. Like, they were in Jacksonville before the Jaguars came. And I think you would have had, they were in Oakland after the Raiders left. I think you would have had.
The Bandits were actually better than the Bucks at that point, so we may have took them in Tampa over the Bucks.
And the Bandits had cool helmets too.
Yes, they did.
And Steve Spurrier is our head coach.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think like what ultimately would have happened is a merger. And I just want to say, and I'm being sincere, this is not a political statement. Donald Trump ruined the league. Like, he just ruined the league. He came in, he bought a team because he wanted an NFL team, and the NFL had been rejecting him. He thought, I'm going to force a merger. He bought this team, the New Jersey Generals. He had a secret meeting with Pete Rozelle, the NFL commissioner, where he basically said, I will undermine the USFL if you can promise me an NFL team. Rozelle knew what he was, said, as long as you or your heirs are involved in football, you will never have anything to do with the NFL. And then he forced this lawsuit that was doomed to failed, and the USFL died. And the thing that makes me sad about it, honestly, is number one, the USFL was awesome. And number two, it gave so many people jobs. Like, this was a great opportunity for hundreds and hundreds of football players. And like, he never really cared about it. He just wanted an NFL team. That's true.
in speaking of that, can you tell the when they walked out of the courthouse, the John Mara story?
Oh yeah. Wait,
That's awesome.
So John Mara was the one of the owners of the Giants, and he was standing with Donald Trump or in front of Donald Trump. And basically the ruling was it was an antitrust case. The USFL was suing that the NFL had a monopoly on TV, football TV in the fall, because the USFL plan was going to fall. And the USFL won. USFL actually won this case. And in the immediate aftermath, it was like the NFL was shocked. P. Rozelle drove off in a taxi from the courthouse, devastated because he hadn't heard the ruling. And basically, what was decided was, yes, the NFL has monopolized football in the fall. There's no question about it. However, this is the USFL's fault. The USFL has not gotten out of its own way. The USFL has caused grave injury to itself, et cetera, et cetera. So we are rewarding you. The award is $1. And John Mara of the Giants pulls out $1 and hands it to Donald Trump. This is one of the biggest badass gangster moves of all time.
So baller. Like, here you go, bud.
Yeah.
The Tupac book for a second. Would having written as many sports books as you have, and this being your first foray into outside of sports, like, is it because the subject matter? Is it because you want to challenge yourself, or is it because you also realize it's never been done right? And this is such a polarizing topic, over decades, that like you feel like if you put this crown jewel out that really tells the whole story, goes into some things others haven't, that it goes down as just what an amazing legacy book. What drove you to make that kind of change in direction?
I mean, I've never thought of my like any kind of legacy, so it's definitely not that. Like, I think a couple of things. I love Tupac. Like, I actually love Tupac. I'm fascinated by Tupac. He's always fascinated me. He's a very interesting artist. A young death is fascinating in and of itself, and sort of what that means and how it affects a legacy. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to do a deep dive Tupac book, and waiting and waiting. And finally I was kind of like, I'm just going to do it. Like, why can't I do it? Like, all the tools I've learned from reporting sports, they apply to other mediums. I feel a little bit, honestly, remember years ago when Garth Brooks did a rock album and he did it as Chris Gaines? Oh yeah. And I feel like that a little bit. Like, I feel like I'm a guy who's just trying a different medium, but it's still the same, it's still music, it's still writing. It's just a little bit of a different medium. And also it's refreshing. It's the hardest book I've ever written, but it's definitely refreshing to do something besides sports.
Well, and I thought it was really interesting too, where you talked about, you really spend like that first 18 months just information gathering. You know what I mean? But, but before you even think about, working on any manuscript, and during that time, and you're taking in all this information, are you starting to, basic building blocks of how you think it'll flow, or is that way too far ahead to even be thinking like that?
No, it's very much like a game of Tetris in your mind where stuff starts clicking in and you start seeing connectors and you're like, oh, I get it now. Like, oh, this connects to that and that connects to that. And that guy, oh, he told me. A lot of it, I'd say that's happened a lot with songs, where there are a lot of Tupac songs and someone will tell you about an experience and they'll be like, so that's why he wrote X song. And I'm like, oh, now I know what that means. Or now I get it when he's making references in this song to that gang or to that person or to that whatever. Yep. Oh, I get it. The other thing that I tell you is amazing about this experience, truly. I always say this, and the same with sports, but this is a different level, is I'm obviously a white guy. I am from tiny town in Mahopac, New York, in the middle of nowhere. My graduating high school class was 330 people, 2 black kids. I was one of very few, maybe 5 Jewish kids in the class. Otherwise, white, Christian, very conservative, very sheltered. Great place to grow up, but sheltered. There come moments when I've been working on this book. Example, he spent a year living in Marin City, which is in Northern California. And it's the projects, Marin City, it's called Jungle. And it was a crack haven. And there was one moment, I was sitting with this guy named Brian Times, and he was one of the leading crack dealers of the 1980s and 90s in Marin City. And I'm in his car, and I'm sitting with him. And I actually said to him, I was like, you don't understand, or maybe you do. Like your life and your upbringing was a 180 for mine. Like we have had exactly 100% opposite existences. And I love everything about that. Like I love that this job takes you places and introduces you. Like there's no other profession where I'd be sitting with a leading crack dealer from Marin City in the 1990s in this car. Like I love that stuff. And the other thing you realize, honest to God, and I wish more people had this, were able to see what I see, is like ultimately people are people. And when you sit down with someone, it doesn't matter. Like when you sit down with someone and you actually talk with them and you're just having a conversation and like stupid politics doesn't come up and you're just talking about your kids or you're talking about music, you're talking about background, or you could be talking about hunting or fishing or not hunting and not like there are so many connections we have as people, and we have regrettably let so much get in the way of that.
Sure,
that's really heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. And I'm guilty of it too. No doubt about it. It is heartbreaking because more than it, we all have basically 80% in common. And there are all these we don't have in common, and that's now we focus on that. And the sad thing is not to be like the political parties they want that. They want us to be mad and they want us to be divisive and they want us to be tribal. And we don't need to be that way.
I completely agree. I mean, and that's why, the business I'm in, barbecue, that's one of the reasons I just absolutely love it. Cause I always say, you sit a good platter of barbecue in the middle of the table. No one cares about race, religion, political affiliation. Right. You know what I mean? Everybody it's so communal, right? Let's just eat, talk about each other's day, hopefully the cook didn't dry anything out, but it's just a fun place to sit around and talk. And I think that's also, when you boil down to like even athletics, like when you're part of a team or, especially part of a team, like, yeah, you have all that mix, but you're together. You know what I mean? Like that, you focus more on the commonality than you do where you differ. And we're all going to have differing opinions. That's what makes us us. And just not letting that be the crux. I completely agree with you, Jeff. That's spot on, brother. All right, guys, proud sponsor of the show, 5-9 Whiskey. You will see me enjoying this from time to time during the podcast. It is delicious, smooth. I've shared it with a ton of friends, and all they want to know is, where can I get it? Built for the tradesman that's put in that long day's work, and when it's over, they want to sit down with a nice whiskey, enjoy those wins from the day, and get ready for the next one. Where can you get it? 5-9 Whiskey. That's spelled out, 59whiskey.com. Don't forget about the promo code, enter Old Boy Podcast for 15% off. I wanted to ask about a couple of friends of mine that I cook with all the time that I don't know if you've reported on or not.
Okay.
Got any good Ken Griffey Jr. stories for me?
Oh, wait, you know Griffey?
Oh, me and Griffey cook all the time together. Yeah, we did. We just did a couple of videos for Traeger together, and we got a fishing trip coming up in August. Yeah, he's awesome. Awesome dude.
All right, so a couple of things. Number one, my favorite baseball player growing up, by far, hands down, no close second, was his dad. His dad was Ken Griffey Sr. And the reason is, when I was a kid, he played for the Yankees. I was in New York, and he had this awesome afro with these killer sideburns, and I just thought Ken Griffey is the coolest man walking the earth. And his son, first of all, was probably the best baseball player. Him and Ricky Henderson were the best, and Bonds, obviously, but were the best baseball players ever covered. And Griffey, I'll tell you a story about Griffey. That's awesome. I was doing a story for Newsday about a baseball player on the Reds, a young pitcher named Joe Valentine. Okay. Mm-hmm. He came and went. And I didn't know much about Joe Valentine, but I was doing this little profile on him. And I asked, can I talk to your parents? And he said, sure. And I said, what are your parents' names? And he said, Debbie and Doreen. And this is 20 years ago. And I was like, Debbie and Doreen? I was like, were you raised by gay parents? And he goes, yeah, I was. I was like, wow, that's actually fascinating. So I started reporting on this. This is when Griffey was with the Reds. Mm-hmm. And I was interviewing different guys. And I remember like a Washington Nationals pitcher said to me, I just don't understand why people have to live like that. And the Washington Nationals PR guy at the time was like, you're making people really uncomfortable asking about issues involving homosexuality, blah, blah, blah. Please don't do that. I went up to Griffey and I was talking about it. And he goes, I don't care. He goes, my best friend is gay. I don't care if everyone in here is gay. Why do I care? Why would that bother me at all? Like, let people live. Mm-hmm. And I just saw like, this is a cool guy. Like, this is a progressive guy, when it would have been very easy for him to say, especially back then, oh, I don't want to talk about this. Don't tell him. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, when I was a baseball writer, I used to wear a backwards Kangol hat everywhere I went. Yeah. Almost just to be remembered. And whenever I'd see Griffey, he'd be like, nice hat. Nice hat. Good hat. He was a cool guy. I always saw Griffey. I mean, mainly because I mean, he was awesome and fun and cool. And he was always in on the joke. I always thought Griffey got the joke. Which
oh my gosh,
ludicrous that we're getting paid a lot of money to wear pajamas and hit a baseball.
Yeah, no, it was so funny. Like he always wanted to be in on the jokes, and you know, he tells me the one about him and Lou Piniella bet a steak dinner in spring training, and Lou won. So Ken was leaving the parking lot that day. And I think they were spring training in Peoria. And he said he looked out across from where he pulled out and he sees this cow pasture and he sees a steer out there. So he calls their PR person and he goes, can you do me a favor? Can you call that cattle farmer across the street and see if we can get that steer in Skip's office tomorrow? So they get Piniella upstairs talking to the front office, This farmer sweeps in, puts this friggin' steer in Lou's office, and they walk Lou back down there, and there's Ken like, here you go, Lou. Here's your steak dinner. And then Ken goes, and then that steer just shits all over the office. He goes, we didn't get that smell out all of spring training. Every time I'd walk in there, Lou'd be like, you son of a bitch. My office still smells like shit.
Wait, I just want to tell you a quick Lou Piniella story, which is...
I'd love to.
Lou Piniella... he's the only guy I've ever interviewed. All right, I had to interview him. I was doing a story about Itro. And they're like, yeah, just go into his office. You can talk to him. And I interviewed Lou Piniella. I'm not joking. While he was simultaneously peeing at a urinal, smoking a cigarette, and eating a hoagie all at the same time.
Oh.
Yes. Cigarette, hoagie, penis. Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Only Lou could pull that off too.
Pretty good. Yeah.
One more Griffey one that this one's good because it kind of makes fun of my dad a little bit. Awesome parents. I won the parent lottery. My dad coached me in baseball, you know, from 5 years old till I went to high school. And my dad, I love Griffey, my favorite player. And my dad, old school Southern man. I don't know why that boy's got to wear his hat backwards. That's disrespect to the game. Da-da-da-da. So when me and Ken get to become friends, I start asking him about it. And he goes, oh, man, I'll tell you the story. So he tells me the story. So about 3 months later, I do a class for him and his golfing buddies at my store. And afterwards, we just took all the food and we were going to have dinner. And I said, hey, you mind if I invite my parents up? Ken's like, please, man, I'd love to meet them. So long story short, it ends up being me and my dad and Ken just sitting in my store talking. And Ken's like, Mr. Ward, I heard you coach some state championship teams and this and that. He's like, you got any questions for me? And he goes, yeah, man, why'd you always wear your hat backwards? And I know when he asks this, my dad's going to feel this tall when he's done. And he goes, well, Mr. Ward, he goes, you remember my dad, right? He goes, yeah. He goes, you remember my dad had that big ass fro? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, dude, I'd go shag, when I was out of school. He's like, I'd go on the home games. He's like, I'd just go shag BP. He said, well, I'd want to wear my dad's hat. He said, there's no way I can wear my dad's hat because it's this big. It'd get in my eyes. He said, so my dad would always put the hat on me backwards so I could catch fly balls. So that's always an ode to my dad and those memories. And you watch my dad, all the color just sunk out of his face. And he was as white as could be. And he just looked Ken in the eye and goes, man, I'm really sorry. Because I'm just really sorry.
That's funny.
And then the other one I had, or the one I wanted to ask you about, because I've got to spend some time with him and just his energy, and is George Brett. Like that guy he's just always been fun for me to be around. He's done some cooking classes with me out at Traeger HQ. Anything I've been around him, he loves to talk about the game. He doesn't shy away from it at all. And he's just got that infectious personality. He's always been fun for me to be around.
So I don't have any great George Brett stories. I have interviewed him, but I have to ask you.
Yeah.
Have you seen the famous George Brett video?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the shit your pants video? Oh, man. We talked in depth about it, old boy. Yeah. He's like, dude, that was so fucking embarrassing. He's like, I've got my blazer around my pants. He's like, and all I'm sitting there thinking, Chad, is I just shit myself and I got to get all the way back to this resort. And I'm George Brett. People are going to want to stop talking. He's like, it's just embarrassing.
I don't know, but what is more embarrassing, the video or the actual moment? For like, was he embarrassed by the video of him explaining?
Yes, he was.
Recently, I'm not joking. Maybe within the last month, that video crossed my mind, and I told my wife, I was like, I got to show you this. And she's always like, she's not big into like video. I'm like, just watch. And she found that very amusing. So
I've got a pretty funny George one. 2 years ago, me and my girlfriend Julie go to Mike Allstott's golf tournament. I've done it for many years. You know, he's over here in Tampa, so not too far for us, and just like supporting Mike and the guys. And he had Goose and Wells there that year. So me and Goose Gossage get to talking at dinner on Friday night, and he's like, "Hey man, you know, I know you work with Traeger and you're barbecue guys. Like, do you ever work with any old timers like us?" And knowing George and Goose's background, I just couldn't resist, Jeff. I go, "Oh yeah, Goose, like, you're like, you mean like, you know, yeah, I work with other Hall of Famers like George Brett." Kind of looked at me and he goes, "Oh, that son of a bitch." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he talks about George and I was like, "You know, Goose, George has never said anything but the finest about you." He's like, "I know that's full of shit." I was like, "You know, let's put this to an end right now, Goose." I said, "If I FaceTime George, will you talk to him?" "Oh yeah, I talk to him." George doesn't answer. I'm like, "Damn it, George." Called you back like an hour later. We're not at dinner anymore. He's like, "Call me tomorrow on the course, FaceTime. When Goose gets there, I'll answer it. I promise." So before we can do that, I see the next morning we're getting set up on the course to serve samples. And I look over and Goose is handing this Ziploc bag that has 8.5 by 11s in it to Julie. And the two on the outside, Jeff, are like him standing in front of the Cooperstown sign, like, "Chad, best wishes, Goose Gossage, Hall of Fame, whatever year." Same one on the back. I think he addressed that one to Julie. I'm like, "There's thick. There's one of them in here in the middle." So I pull the middle one out. And it says, "Chad, to a dear Royals fan," which I'm not. I'm just a George fan. Yeah. "To a dear Royals fan, so nice meeting you. Wish you all the best. Fuck George Brett. Triple underlined fuck. Your pal Goose Gossage." Oh my gosh. And so then Goose is like, "So when are we going to FaceTime George?" I was like, "Oh, he's not available today, Goose. We're not going to do that." I'm like, "If you put that on a picture, I can only imagine how this FaceTime is going to go." I thought that was pretty hilarious.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, fun guys. One of the things I want to talk to you about when you were at SI, obviously, and I know you did a ton of work there, but the rocker story obviously was one that just, when you're having that interview and discussion, like, it has to be kind of hard to split the professional from the personal, right? Like some of the shit he's saying, but you have to keep wanting to report on it and tell the story. Like, how do you manage that when something like that comes up? And was that one of the more, I don't want to say awkward, or maybe just like eye-opening interviews, like when that's happening and he's spewing all this ridiculousness?
So the thing is, it's not hard because you, like, journalism is, a lot of it is listening. Like, it's just listening, you know? And also, like, I don't really get offended. Like, as weird as that sounds, like, I know people, again, I'm from the small town Mahopac, New York. I know people, if you talk bad about Mahopac, how dare you? Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. So when we're driving around and he's dumping on everyone, I'm just more fascinated that he's doing it to me and that he knows I'm a reporter and I'm interviewing him and that he feels weirdly comfortable being kind of a bigoted jackass in the presence of media is weird to me. But I wasn't offended, and it wasn't hard for me to listen. I remember when it ended, I got out of the car and called my mom, and I was like, "I don't know what the hell just happened." I think that's probably my exact quote. "I don't know what the hell just happened," because it was so bizarre. And then the story just blew up, you know, and that was it for John Rocker. So
yeah, no, and I mean, and yeah, that was definitely it for John Rocker. And the other one that was interesting too, that I know just got a ton of eyes and you know, was kind of once again one of those that was the first time it really coming out and being talked about a lot, was the Favre book, Gunslinger. Yep. When, you know, because I think you were one of the first ones to kind of dive into, you know, the opioids and the drinking and that kind of stuff. How, when that kind of stuff, like, what kind of feedback do you get? Is there backlash for these people that like have, you know, number 4 tattoos and think like you're terrible for bringing this up once again when you're just trying to tell the story of the whole person? Like, what's some of that feedback like? And once again, I know you're professional, so you just manage it the way you manage it, but how does some of that happen when those first releases come out and people are buying, you know, those initial copies?
The worst one was with Walter Payton, actually, because that book, before the book came out, Sports Illustrated ran an excerpt in the magazine, and it was about later in his life and the depression and kind of suicidal thoughts and all that stuff. And the excerpt came out, and people in Chicago just thought, oh, this guy's writing this Kill Walter Payton book. And I got a ton of backlash for that. And it got really heated. A radio station outside of Chicago did a book burning that they broadcast on YouTube. It was just really rough. And I was supposed to go promote the book in Chicago. I ended up not going initially. My publisher was like, it seems kind of dangerous. So the difference is with a guy like Favre is like, people kind of knew what he was. Now, obviously, I went into details, but it wasn't like people thought he was a choir boy. And people knew about his drug issues. Like, that was known. It was even known that he sent dick pics to a sideline reporter. So it was more exploring into it and what it was. So I just think people did not have the same expectations they might have had for Walter Payton.
Got it. That makes sense. And then one of the other book things I wanted to ask about was the book on Bonds. Because your book came out, and then I think it was, a couple weeks later that Game of Shadows came out? Close there timeline-wise?
Not quite, man. Not quite. Game of Shadows came out first.
Oh, did it? Oh, okay. Then I did have it, but it was like within the same month, right?
Yeah, but it was okay for them and horrible for me.
Well, and I was going to ask that, like, how does that...
Terrible.
So I guess it's just two different published company. Like, I guess my question was, like, how is one publishing company not aware that the other one's coming out with something with such similar subject matter in such a short, same period of time?
Well, at some point we learned, it's not like you broadcast, you don't always broadcast exactly when your book is coming out. And at some point we did learn, and it was kind of like, well, what are you going to do? But it was, I remember my publisher really tried spinning it in a positive light. Their book is more about steroids. This is about the whole man and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I remember the Wall Street Journal did a long story about the two books. And these two competing books came out. And the moment I knew I was in trouble is in that story, they misspelled my name the entire time. And I thought, oh boy, this is bad. And my book sold. Game of Shadows was an awesome, awesome book. Like awesome. And they were great reporters. So it's zero. They deserve everything they got. It was just kind of a bummer. It was definitely disappointing.
And then as we're wrapping up here, to me, one of the more interesting baseball stories of this year is the whole Ohtani interpreter betting.
Yeah.
Do you think it's really the interpreter? Do you think there was any knowledge on Ohtani's behalf of any? I mean, just $16 million. And I know he's got a shit ton of money, but $16 million just disappearing seems like a little excessive.
I honestly have no idea. The thing I can tell you that I do feel like is, as the line between gambling and sports has gone thinner and thinner and thinner, and the leagues themselves, I think they're walking on dynamite. There's just a lot of room for so many years. When I was a kid, Major League Baseball banned Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays for a period of time because they worked for a casino. So they banned them from having involved in Major League Baseball. We are so far removed from that. Yes. It's just, to me, it's a really dangerous place for the leagues to be, but they're doing what they want to do. And I don't, what? I'll tell you something that happened to me recently. Not that recently, a couple of years ago. I was at a supermarket near here, and outside the supermarket, there was a person getting signatures for raised money for the homeless. We need more money allocated for the homeless. That's what it was. And there was a petition. What a supermarket, people were trying to get petitions on. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I never signed a petition without reading it. So I took a picture of the petition. And it turns out the petition was sponsored by either DraftKings or the other one, whatever it is, the two gambling sites.
FanDuel?
Well, yeah, FanDuel, one of those two. And basically, it was to legalize online gambling in California. And 0.0000001% of whatever went to homeless bet. And I was like, this whole industry is disgusting. Like, it's just disgusting. And it is an addiction. I know people don't like thinking it that way. Leave me alone. It is an addiction. And just the level of how the floodgates have opened on this, and it's over. So, yeah,
they've definitely let the, and it's hard to say, oh, you can't do this while every media partner that you have as a league is in bed with somebody. And I completely agree with you. It has totally gotten blurred. And to me, between that and, just the other thing on the sports front, just an NIL like that. I just think somehow they've got to. It's like they just opened that barn door with no real guardrails around it, and now it's just gotten completely out of hand. And the fact they want to roll it down to high schools, it's asinine to me. I feel like we're really killing, what's supposed to be amateur college sports. It just seems like it's all going by the wayside.
I mean, I guess there are two ways to look at it. I don't disagree with you. On the one hand, these conferences, these universities have taken advantage of a very high percentage of poor Black athletes coming from inner city, poor, impoverished environments for a long time and have made millions and millions off of them. So I cannot begrudge athletes for getting a share because it is kind of gross. On the other hand, from a fan standpoint, like I watched the NBA draft last night. When I was a kid, man, the NBA draft, you knew all the players and you were like, oh man, Ewing, Olajuwon, Sampson,
yeah.
Where are they going? 96 draft, Iverson, all these guys. I don't know any of these people anymore. I have no idea who they are. They're a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds. I don't know who they are. So it does take some of the fun out of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So, man, we're gonna wrap up here. A couple of things. One, now that you've got the manuscript due here in a couple of months, like what does the rest of that timeline look like for the Tupac book? You have another year of going back and forth once you submit. Like, what does that look like?
Bro, it's due in 3 months. It sucks. Every day I'm sitting here writing in a pile of shit, just trying to get through. It's hard. This is my least favorite part of it. It's just writing, trying to grind this thing out, put it together. Again, you said 1,000 articles. It's not 1,000. It's probably 10,000 articles. 650 interviews, and just melding it books in my bookshelf of Tupac stuff. Like books upon book, and just merging it together. I'm not saying, look, there are harder jobs.
Sure,
it's a great job. I get to earn a PhD in Tupac. Basically, it's a great thing, but it mentally beats the crap out of me.
Oh, I can only imagine. And then there has to be at some point where there's so much Tupac information in your brain. You're like, okay, just got to kind of balance this out a little bit, because I'm sure it can start to kind of overlap each other, and you just have to sit down and kind of reconnect. Because I mean, that's just inundating yourself with so much info on one topic.
I mean, the main thing is that we go through in my household is my wife is like, okay, I don't need to hear another Tupac story. I'm pretty good now. What do you want to have for dinner? I'm like, no, just one more thing. Every topic. Don't need another Walter Payton story. Don't need another 86 Met story. I'm good.
Yeah. I will say in closing, if they were going to take one more of your books and turn it into a TV series, my vote would be the 86 Mets.
Me too, man. 1,000,000%.
Could you imagine that? Like finding guys to play Lenny, Daryl, Dwight, Gary Carter, like that would be I think that would be, and just how wild and crazy that bunch was. Like that, I think that would be a kick-ass series.
Hey, if you want to pay for it, I'm in.
Awesome, man. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for the time, man. I know you got to get back to work, but like I said, huge fan, and just really enjoyed the conversation today. And, when the book comes out, would love to have you back on and chat a little bit more about it. And just once again, thank you so much for the time and the insight and the great stories.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for taking interest. I appreciate it.
Awesome, for sure. And guys, thank you so much for tuning into this edition of the Old Boy Podcast. We'll look forward to catching you next week. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Old Boy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, set your notifications, whatever you got to do to make sure you're getting the latest episodes. Also, feel free to go back, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple, get some of the past episodes, check those out, and always feel free to check out our socials, Old Boy Podcast. Thank you so much.